Hello, and welcome to the City of Truth. Episode 3, On Meaning. I've known a few people who have attempted suicide, including some who died that way. One of them was a guy my age. We used to play night games together, back before children had phones, because he lived on my block. We were never close friends, but we were friends. As he graduated high school, he got caught with opium. It put his hockey scholarship in jeopardy. Around the same time, his girlfriend left him. He had his entire life ahead of him. Instead, he put a shotgun to his chest and pulled the trigger. Why would anyone do that? I can't say for sure, any more than anyone else, but it's a response to a darkness that seems inescapable. Other people have suffered intensely throughout history, but they usually made it through all right. What gives some people that resiliency? The answer to both questions, I think, is meaning. A person who feels like all the meaning in his life had dissolved in front of him doesn't see any reason to go on living. Add to that any other issues they may be having, chemical or otherwise, and suicide may appear to be a rational choice. Life had failed. There is no more meaning to be had, and so you opt out. Likewise, the man who can ascribe meaning to his life can endure nearly anything. Every moment suffered for love, for country, for his children, is a badge of honor. He may be suffering, but there is a fulfillment in it, dare I say even a joy at times. A man who bleeds for the good is honorable. The West bent its knee to such a sign for 15 centuries. Regardless of one's beliefs, it's clear that there's something to it. It's worth exploring, and it may even mean the difference between triumph and death when we are confronted with our darkest hours. It is my view that life is worth living. There are a great number of people who appear to be invested in denying this. That is a madness I can't grasp. A man can, perhaps, deny that life has any meaning with all sincerity, but he should be dragged kicking and screaming into that camp. Instead, we find men zealously guarding its gates, raiding into the countryside to take slaves. I find it hard to believe that this is the product of mere thought, and I'll consider a bit whether there's anything more at play here. But allow me to commit the genetic fallacy to make a point. The man who guards and defends such a camp must have scars in his soul that he can't find a way to heal. We find meaning in story. If you want to live, you need a reason to keep on living, a why to life. Modernism has seeped into our society and broken the unity between meaning, the idea and purpose of the world, and reality, the world as it exists external to us. We struggle personally with the former, and utilize the scientific method to analyze the latter. And because of this, we think the only objective way of assessing the real world is to dismiss meaning as subjective. And if meaning is subjective, then it's arbitrary. It seems to me no accident that the gradual abandonment of the Christian worldview was accompanied by the birth of the novel, nor that the post-Christian world after the First World War likewise brought with it the birth of modern media. We filled the psychological need for narrative with whatever hand-picked alternatives suited our taste. I think the more educated a man is, the more he's prone to this sort of mental divorce. Education often means engaging in the process of trying to step outside of one intellectual frame and look at the world from another. This is a good exercise for understanding things, but it's easy to lose yourself in it. Perspectives become like so many pairs of pants that you throw on and take off as you please. Each is as good as the next, it seems, and pretty soon you're running around without any pants at all. If all points of view appear interchangeable, then any belief system or set of goals can be chosen or dismissed at will. So what are the reasonable responses to the death of meaning, if it really is simply a subjective choice? Well, first, provided you don't dwell on it, meaning can be safely ignored. We keep ourselves busy enough not to notice most of the time. When that doesn't work, we just arbitrarily pick something. We choose to live vicariously through other stories. Video games, TV shows, novels, anime, LARPing, and countless other things are just expressions of this. The third path is simply to resign to meaninglessness. Yet this is so antithetical to our nature that it inevitably results in depression, which is often, not always, nothing else but a reasonable sense of meaninglessness. Prior cultures didn't think this way. The divorce between reality and meaning is the very substance of modern life. I think that's why pre-modern cultures still hold a romantic appeal in the modern imagination. We've all felt ourselves drawn to some other culture and its charms, a malady that seems to afflict only those societies who consider themselves sophisticated like ours. But the modern mind is deeply conflicted, drawn in two directions that appear diametrically opposed, the draw of objective truth and the draw of meaning. These two are seen as existing in conflict with each other. Those drawn more by the first become scientists, rationalists, and often atheists. Those drawn by the latter become romantics, poets, and spiritual. In the past, these were simply two sides to humanity, and people favored one expression or the other. Not so today. Today, these are two different humanities. The First World War birthed the modern world by severing the two violently. The psychological damage of modernity will only be repaired when we have found a way to reunite the two. Meaning and reality must be wedded once more. They must be. Man can no more abandon meaning than he can abandon belief in the external world. We do still have society-wide narratives, sometimes called grand narratives, available to us, and these have offered greater attraction the more meaning-starved the populace becomes. Improving the world's standard of living, socialism, environmentalism, the pursuit of scientific knowledge, personal achievement, all of these can have an almost religious pull on people. They become more than a hobby or a profession and become the reason for being. Notice that I'm not speaking here whatsoever as to whether these ideas are good or bad, true or false. That doesn't really matter for the present discussion. I'm speaking here only of the question of meaning, which they most certainly fulfill. It also explains why those things are clung to as to a life raft, with religious zeal, as though the abandonment thereof would be worse than death. Because it would be. Death for a noble cause has meaning. The death of meaning itself has none. Yet all of these proposals rest upon more fundamental foundations, the kind of things we're starting to address in this podcast. Reducing human suffering, for instance, only derives its meaning from the fact that we care about other people as we care about ourselves. We have to examine that. And it may be fair to note at this point how very peculiar it is that we need meaning at all. The truth of it is undeniable. One could perhaps argue, from the evolutionary perspective, that it's simply a product of man's success as a result of goal-seeking behavior. But meaning can be distinguished from goal-seeking, and moreover, it seems that the loftier and more unattainable the goal, the greater the sense of meaning it provides. Having the goal of finishing your taxes doesn't provide meaning, despite it being a goal and useful and realistic. But contributing in some small way to a grand project, even one that you'll never see the end of, that can be immensely meaningful. Think of those 400-year-old cathedrals, the colonizations of new lands, the beginnings of great libraries. Other explanations are proffered, but are likewise disputable. What can be agreed on, however, is that humans are meaning machines, and moreover, that we have some discretion in that regard. Now, there are a ton of dimensions to this question. Heck, I could probably do 10 episodes just on meaning alone, its impact on Western civilization, its effect on our concepts of morality, the fact that we're often at odds with ourselves and our supposed purpose, and so on. Maybe I will one day, but I don't want to get too sidetracked here. I believe this lack of solid footing has recently had a profound result on the stability of the West. We intrinsically understand that our lives are supposed to be meaningful, and that, moreover, this is supposed to be fundamentally wedded to society, as indeed it has been in nearly all other societies. But in ours, we don't see or receive meaning, individually or collectively. Thus, we have a fundamental instinct that something is wrong. Countless men choose countless ways to express this discomfort. They blame the other side politically, they lash out, they join radical causes, they root for our destruction deep down. Society is not doing that which by instinct we know is among its most fundamental duties, and we hate it for that. By the same instinct, we expect it to either fall or transform. We have come to what I see as the secret sickness that the West endures. This is the heart of widespread ingratitude and unhappiness. This is the source of the dark desire for the destruction of the West. This is why so much of the Western world appears to be suicidal. The West in its present form has failed to provide us with the unity that all cultures must provide, marrying what is real and what is meaningful. Moreover, the failure of psychological unity in the West is existentially exhausting. It renders the soul tired, permanently and essentially tired. It becomes weak, divided, doubtful, cynical, and eventually blind and suicidal. If the West hopes to survive, it needs to find a cure. That cure can only come from a restored unity. A man can only exist in a state of psychological tension for so long. We all have different breaking points. But a man who, for instance, lives in a habit that he finds morally repugnant will eventually either abandon the habit or the moral repugnance. Such is the state of our whole civilization. It is my view that we must find unity, or we will destroy ourselves. We haven't yet spoken of the nature of that unity, but let us first consider its pursuit. 3.1 Pursuit of Unity. Let's say we do find some basis for an objective morality and meaning. We find a way to unify the two spheres. In pursuing unity and a consistent, intentional life, we can set a goal for ourselves that is not arbitrary and can continue for our entire lives. This is a sort of human perfection that is attainable and distinctly human. To no longer be of a divided mind or will, to have this singular focus in life, and to turn every action, no matter how great or small, into a manifestation or compliance with that ideal, is perhaps the greatest personal triumph that an individual could attain. It is mastery over the self. This is what the ancient writers meant when they spoke of virtue and of living a rational life. Ask yourself a simple question. Are you coherent? Is your life consistent, or is it a mess of contradictions? What are you about, really? Are you who you want to be? Men have the incredible power to choose what they're about, and once chosen, everything we admire in men is manifested by this unity between action and belief. We despise hypocrisy for this very reason, and admire courage even in our enemies. This is what we all want to be. It's what you want to be. The crisis of modernity, however, prevents us from ever attaining it. So long as meaning is severed from reality, action can't become a manifestation of that, except accidentally, or for relatively minor and natural circumstances. Despite our psychological break, no set of ideas can utterly rob us of the sense of meaning we get from holding our newborn child, or getting married, or seeing our loved ones succeed. Nature has so imbued us with proper dispositions in this regard that we discover meaning there without effort. In these we get a taste of what life could be, but we may also see, all the more clearly, how broken it is. To move beyond those natural sources of meaning, we must enter the realm of the philosopher. Philosophers certainly didn't derive their theories in a vacuum, but the claim of Nietzsche and the postmodern thinkers that all philosophy is autobiographical is a deeply troubling worldview. They claim that a man's philosophy is just a product of who they are, which is the same as saying it has no relationship to what's true. It's emblematic of the problem, because it concedes that our attempts to assign meaning to the world are mere psychological artifacts. This is the same as saying that they aren't married to the world as it is. It also renders worthless all debate. You needn't go so far as the postmodernists to render any debate utterly meaningless. The divorce of meaning from the world found in materialism, for instance, means that human interactions aren't mediated by ideas, but by physical causes, and that convincing someone with the force of argument is simply a product of a set of physical circumstances. In other words, the intrinsic merit of the idea isn't even under consideration. It doesn't take much thought to realize that this is the death of ideas, considered in themselves. All ideas. Even those of a more traditional or religious bent have largely fallen into this pattern of thinking. Nearly all conversations beyond the scientific realm is reduced to a question of personal taste or feelings. We talk about my truth as opposed to the truth. If we wish to repair the psychological damage of the modern divorce of meaning from reality, we must reject this tendency. 3.2 Virtue. It is in the will that we find our meaning. We'll have to cover this question of free will later, but in the broad sense at least, there must be some truth to this. Meaning is found in the manifestation of our ideal, the union between that ideal and the world as it is, acted out. Think of every time in your life where you had an experience of meaning. Weren't those moments always an expression of this? Where your actions, your circumstances, and your ideal were all working together? If we wish to unite ourselves to objective meaning in the world and manifest an ideal, that ideal should be what we believe is true, and it must be the greatest ideal we can find. To manifest only one particular goal, to reduce all of life to a single simple dimension, is to become a single-issue crusader or an ideologue, as Jordan Peterson says. Each of us individually has to work to determine what the grand narrative of the world is. We each possess our own wills, which no power under heaven can control. None can force your hand, but we can explore the subject together. Here we'll first pursue the methodology of Jordan Peterson to provide us with an initial framework. He has argued that our human nature and our own archetypes show us how to manifest ourselves in the world. We can see in what we admire what ideals we should pursue. We admire wisdom. We admire courage. We admire honesty and integrity. We admire those with character, those who can face a hard temptation to corruption and turn away. We admire those who keep their promises. We admire hard workers and determination. We admire those who live out their ideals, those heroes and sages that we still talk about today. Whatever the explanation for it, we all have an inborn sense of this. The term used throughout history for this is virtue. It is the collection of traits that allow for the attainment of a goal and consistency of living. Whatever high goal a man pursues, there will be hard work, temptations, long hours, moments of fear, moments of doubt, moments requiring personal judgment. Virtue, or character, is simply the set of personal tools that are suited to dealing with these difficulties. These virtues are universal, and so in a sense objectively tied to the world as it is. They really are an ideal state of humanity, and one that would be admired by any group of men in any time, once accounting for the surprisingly minimal cultural adjustments. For example, we honor our ancestors by burying them and remembering them. The Shintos pray to them. Certain tribes in Papua New Guinea would eat them. The manifestation of this virtue is wildly different, and in ways we may find abhorrent. And they may in fact be abhorrent or not, that's a separate question. But all of them show universal agreement that we should honor our ancestors. Our mothers and fathers deserve respect, all else being equal. Virtue is, in fact, a sort of meta-tool. It is the set of traits needed to pursue a goal, regardless of the worthiness of the goal. The classical breakdown of the cardinal virtues are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. This is largely the same as being thoughtful, moderate, fair, and brave. There is little doubt that such a person would earn the admiration of his peers in any society. This means that, although virtue only has value in reference to a higher goal, after all, consistency in being a serial killer is hardly worthy of honor, it is worth pursuing virtue whatever your goal may be. Whatever union of purpose and reality we find, we know a few things. We know that it is consistent with actual science. We know it must consider humans as independent agents. We know it must provide ultimate perspective, such that the goal encompasses all of human life and all of reality. It accounts for the world as it is. It is internally consistent. It would promote virtue, given its utility. It would likely have a beneficial effect on civilization, promoting both social harmony and individual goodness. And unless we think that all humanity was mad from the beginning of time until today, a suggestion too arrogant for me to ever entertain, it was likely held by other people in the past or present. When we consider past or present ideas, it is perhaps important to remember that a man can call himself anything he wants. It is a simple matter of saying so, and the compliance between a man's self-identity and his actual beliefs or practices can be zero. Why is this important? Well, everyone has encountered people who live inconsistently, or who hold a shallower view of their belief system, or utilize it as a cudgel with which to beat others over the head. For instance, I can be a capitalist because it seems the most fitting label to assuage my guilt over defrauding people. Or I can call myself a socialist because I really hate the rich. I can be a Jew because I happen to marry a Jew. Or I can be an atheist because a lot of religious people beat me up when I was 12. In short, it is impossible to judge the validity of a set of ideas based on a small sample of people who claim to be that thing. It would be irrational to dismiss capitalism simply because I met some capitalists who were jerks. Whatever ideals we survey, we should approach them with fresh eyes. True, we should consider the social consequences of ideas, but we must also remember that we are often blinded by the familiar. 3.3. An ideal. There are all manner of systematic reasonings on questions of meaning. Some of them are quite convincing and profound. Some are not. But to absorb any of those ideas, an individual can't retain within themselves any residual investment in their denial. We've all had conversations where a person we've spoken to refused to acknowledge what had been clearly shown to them. They were too stubborn, too set in their idea, too invested. Our minds are a realm of ideas, but not exclusively of ideas. And very few ideas are so intrinsically compelling and so perfectly and forcefully presented that they drag the listener against their will to the truth. No, it's only those open to new consideration that can be persuaded. We are not mere minds with ideas. We also possess wills with goals. We react with defensiveness and hostility when either are threatened. And the more invested we are, the more hostile we will react to a contradiction. This isn't insane. Perhaps it's not even a fault of mankind at times. We hold the truths that sit deeper in us than the ideas we speak aloud. Often, as a result, we have a sense that a certain thing rings true to us, and it takes little effort to convince us. Other times, no matter how clear an argument appears, we have some instinct that it's missing something. Certainly, we need to reflect on our own motives. We have to understand why we resist an idea before we can suspect our instinct to be a hidden wisdom. If we stand for anything, or believe in anything, or even have a personality, then there are most certainly a set of ideas or dispositions which will run counter to them. This is true even of those deeper unspoken beliefs. Is our resistance to an idea based on wisdom? Or does it simply grate against our instinct, personality, or unconscious biases? This is not an unimportant question. If we trust these instincts, but they're poorly disposed, we will almost certainly find ourselves to be the stubborn fool we've been so frustrated by. We will be the man who won't see reason. And there's certainly one case where, if anything, we ought to be disposed to distrust those instincts instead. And this is when our life isn't working. When we're unhappy, or habitually anxious, or disgusted with ourselves, it's almost certainly because there is some disposition in us that has gone horribly awry. In that case, our instincts will only serve to bind us to a place we don't want to be. To free ourselves, we must become uncomfortable. The deeper the sickness, the greater the discomfort will be. If there is a will in us, and we have a mind, and science is true, and morality is not subjective, and we are right to combat oppression, and the lack of meaning destroys us psychologically, but its possession brings us peace, and man finds himself inextricably drawn toward something greater than himself, then surely this collection of facts means something. Surely the marriage between meaning and reality lies in there. Could our lives be a story? There it is, this something that draws us, this goodness that we admire. We see it in beauty, in harmonious order, in the romance of life. We admire it in virtue, seek it in moral order. It stands out more strikingly still when it's missing, the horrors of suffering, the outrages of holocausts, the pain of a loved one's death. It ought not to be that way, but then, how should it be? What's the highest ideal you can conceive of? What would be the essence of it? That goodness we find in all things, what is that? If you could distill the beauty of the sunset, or the sleeping babe, refine the sacrifice of the grim soldier, isolate the pure love of a mother or husband or friend, what will we find? Are these the same thing? What do we mean when we say that something is good, except that there is something supremely and inherently desirable and perfect in it? What is good? How can things as disparate as the Sistine Chapel, the dung beetle, and the perfect day all have their share in it? Surely it must be common to all things, or at least all things not evil, right? What could it be that reaffirms our very being, gives us meaning, provides value to all our high ambition? And if you've already heard something whispered in your mind, why would you resist it? Isn't this affirmation of being everything we want in our world? What if you are meant to share in it, as nearly all men throughout history have desired to do? Could it be that, perhaps, just perhaps, you've been mistaken to think that what you value can only be preserved by resisting, that perhaps the hard road is where you will find safety? Isn't unending skepticism of everything tiresome? Isn't it better to assert something positive about the world? You have two choices. Either the world makes sense or it doesn't. Either there is meaning in what you do or there isn't. Either you can be a good person or that's nonsense. Which path will you choose? Quote, some person, having asked him what is common sense, Epictetus replied, there are certain things which men, who are not altogether perverted, see by the common notions which all possess. Such a constitution of the mind is named common sense. Those who have a good natural disposition, even if you try to turn them aside, cling still more to reason. We see then that the carpenter, when he has learned certain things, becomes a carpenter. The pilot, by learning certain things, becomes a pilot. May it not then, in philosophy, also not be sufficient to wish to be wise and good, and that there is also a necessity to learn certain things? We inquire then what these things are. The philosophers say that we ought first to learn that there is a God, and that he provides for all things. Epictetus. Next week, we will begin a multi-part series on the existence of God.